Good morning and thanks for staying tuned. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridulwale, the headlines. Russia attacks 40 towns in Donbas and Luhansk regions. Ukraine rebuffs suggestions by the West to cede territory to Russia in the interest of peace. And Russia promises safe corridor for ships to leave Black Sea ports. Ukraine calls it blackmail. Ukraine's military says Russian forces have shelled more than 40 towns in the eastern Donbas region, threatening to shut off the last main escape route for civilians trapped in the path of their invasion, now in its fourth month. The Joint Task Force of Ukraine's armed forces said in a social media post that the occupiers shelled more than 40 towns in Donetsk and Luhansk region, destroying or damaging 47 civilian sites, including 38 homes and a school. As a result of this shelling, 5 civilians died and 12 were wounded. Russia has poured thousands of troops into that region, attacking from 3 sides in an attempt to encircle Ukrainian forces holding out in the city of Severodonetsk and its twin Lysychansk. Their fall would leave the whole of Luhansk province under Russian control, a key Kremlin war aim. Meanwhile, Russian forces have taken control of 3 Donetsk region towns, including Svitlodarsk, and that's according to the regional governor, Pavlo Kyrylenko. Earlier, the Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic said in a post on Telegram messaging service that its forces had taken control of the town and replaced the Ukrainian flag with a Russian flag. Svitlodarsk is 80 kilometers southwest of Severodonetsk, the focus of Russian attacks in recent days. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger of being like those who appeased the Nazis in 1938, after Mr. Kissinger suggested Ukraine should let Russia creep Crimea, which it annexed in 2014. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Mr. Kissinger said negotiations need to begin in the next 2 months before it creates upheavals and tensions that will not be easily overcome. In a video message, Mr. Zelensky said, "You get the impression that Mr. Kissinger doesn't have 2022 on his calendar, but 1938, and that he thinks he's talking to an audience not in Davos, but in Munich back then." Mr. Zelensky says suggesting Ukraine give up territory is convenient, habitual, and often very profitable for those who do so.
Symptomatic editorials began to appear in some Western media outlets, stating that Ukraine must allegedly accept so-called difficult compromises by giving up territory in exchange for peace. Perhaps the New York Times in 1938 also wrote something similar. But now, let me remind you, it's 2022. Millions of those actually live in the territory they propose to give in exchange for the illusion of peace. Mr. Kissinger emerges from the deep past and says that a piece of Ukraine should be given to Russia. Supposedly that there was no alienation of Russia from Europe. You get the impression that Mr. Kissinger's calendar is not 2022, but 1938. And he thinks he's talking to an audience not in Davos, but in then Munich. The Russian authorities have made a landmark decision. They have allowed older people to be recruited for contract service. In other words, they no longer have enough young men, but they still have the will to fight. It still takes time to crush this will. We still need assistance from our partners, first of all, with weapons for Ukraine. Full assistance, no exceptions, no limitations, sufficient to win. This is what those who really value people are talking about.
The Russian Defense Ministry is promising to open a safe corridor to allow foreign ships to leave Black Sea ports. A separate corridor will be open to allow ships to leave Mariupol by sailing from the port on the Sea of Azov to the Black Sea. Russian Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev, who heads the National Defense Control Center under the General Staff, said 70 foreign vessels from 16 countries are now in 6 ports on the Black Sea, including Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv. Mizintsev, whose comments at a briefing in Moscow were reported by a news agency, said the corridors would be open every day. Earlier, the Russian military said Mariupol's port was functioning again after 3 months of fighting. The Defense Ministry spokesperson said the military first had to clear the port of mines. And Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says that Russia was trying to, quote, blackmail the international community by raising the possibility of an offer to unblock Black Sea ports in return for a relaxation of sanctions. This comes after Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko raised the possibility of an offer to unblock ports in the Black Sea in return for the lifting of some sanctions. Ukraine's Black Sea ports have been blocked since Russia sent thousands of troops into Ukraine. The blockade has affected food supply across the world, leading to shortages in wheat and cooking oil. Mr. Kuleba called for further sanctions against Russia, saying concessions to the country had never worked.
Now, today we saw the statement by the Russian official from the Russian, I think, Deputy Foreign Minister, who said, for example, Russia will unblock Ukrainian ports to allow exports of Ukrainian agricultural products to the global market if sanctions are imposed against Russia are lifted. So this is a clear blackmail. You could not find a better example of a blackmail in international relations. If anyone is buying it, I think there is a problem with that person. And we shouldn't waste too much of time trying to understand why that person is making that point.
People does not necessarily ever end well.
Let's talk now to Mr. Confidence McHarry, a geopolitical and security analyst at SBM Intelligence. He joins us virtually. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me once again.
Is this good news? I mean, if there's an offer on the table to allow ships leave all these Black Sea ports with all the grain and the other food supplies that Ukraine has and had been trying to get out to its various customers around the world, this is good news economically, both for Ukraine and for those who had been waiting for the supplies and whose inflationary levels have spiked in the last couple of weeks as a result of rising demand and limited supply.
Yeah, on one hand, you could say that it's good news for people who have been suffering who are at the brink of starvation, malnutrition, and famine, or because of the shortage of wheat and other supplies that they normally get from Ukraine. For instance, as I mentioned in your program some time ago, it's Ukraine and Russia are not necessarily the world's largest producers of these products. It's actually in China. So China is also trying to conserve its own supplies and have not met global demands like the amount that Russia and Ukraine normally would expect. So yes, naturally, it's supposed to be good news, but the downside to this kind of arrangement is, first of all, how much it's going to hold. And when it comes to ceasefires like this, to allow humanitarian aid and then foods to pass through, there is always the danger of one side of ending the entire thing. And so it's important for both sides to continue to be in contact in terms of agreeing on the scale of the operation and the continuity among several other things. And more importantly for both sides, especially the side at the upper hand of where these things will be coming out from, to respect the ceasefire agreements for this thing to go, because in war, trade could still happen. So one cannot use the entire excuse of, we are at war to continue to cause a food blockade, or not only on the people who are the immediate brunt of the war, but also on the periphery. That's people waiting for the global supply of these products to kick off.
Across the world, it does appear as if inflation is a problem, but at the same time, there are fears that it is possible that we could have a recession if the authorities go too far in the measures to curb this inflation. The Russian Monetary Policy Committee is to meet today, and there are those who are saying, well, it's going to relax some of the measures it put in place to strengthen the ruble and secure the Russian economy. because those measures have now made the ruble too strong. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, you have other countries like Nigeria, where the Monetary Policy Committee 2 days ago raised interest rates even much higher than many people were forecasting. How much trouble are we in if this balance is not gotten right across the world?
The thing is, in terms of emergencies like this, you expect countries to do what is right for them. In Russia's case, it's basically rerouted its European partners, especially the people who buy its energy products, to trade in rubles, which of course propelled it against the onslaught of Western sanctions. Yes, I can't really speak on, because I have not really paid attention on the Nigerian side or the monetary, the NPC rates and all of that. But in terms of the scale of recession that is going on, it's still a little far away off, because we are nearly in June, and the forecast, although the forecast seems to tend to bring the reality a lot more closer, but I do think personally that we're still a little far off. And if the war drags on till perhaps August ahead, then we might start to be feeling the impact. But in terms of inflation, the thing is, when it comes to long drawn out conflicts like this, you expect countries to be able to look for alternatives to products that normally they should be able to get on a good day. But so that's what I expect that many people are going to come to terms with. Yes, for a country like Nigeria, where you're not among the top global producers of some of these things that, of course, could cause inflation in our own country. But for these other countries who have the wherewithal to end this kind of situations, you expect them to rise to the globe, which is exactly why you're seeing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz making a trip to Africa, visiting Senegal to export gas to the EU and Germany in particular. You're also seeing the United States President making a tour to Asia. You also saw Boris Johnson making several trips to the Middle East and several other ones. So I do think that countries around the world, especially around the West, are beginning to acknowledge the challenge and are trying to look for ways to mitigate the challenges, especially if this war drags on beyond this month and well into August or September.
There are many people who would have expected you to mention Nigeria as one of the places that all these people would be visiting to try to see if they could secure supplies, because Nigeria has huge reserves of gas in particular, even more than we have of oil. And for many of the countries in Europe, gas seems to be the real problem. And Russia had been traditionally their supplier. But it does appear as if Nigeria doesn't feature on anyone's radar. I know this might sound like, an academic question, but could we feature on the radar? And if so, how quickly can we get to the point where we also get to be considered as a viable alternative for many of those countries that are looking at diversifying supply, not just of energy, but perhaps of other commodities as well?
Yes, we could get to that level, but I think there is an initiative in the works to get Nigerian gas to Europe as an alternative to Russian energy. We saw the Trans-Sahara pipeline that will connect Nigeria with Niger and Algeria to supply gas to Europe, and at the same time, we also have there are also plans by Nigeria to do so. We have from the Nigerian government side trying to key into Europe's gas deficits. But the challenges the Nigerian state or the Nigerian oil industry have to surmount is it's something to note, because currently now the amount of gas or the level of gas that is required to be exported to Europe is not at the level, or is not developed so to the extent that the Nigerian government can be able to handle or to spearhead. So the reason why we are talking about Nigeria being in the contention of gas exporting countries because of how much LNG has developed the gas fields in places like Bonny. So if there is such kind of a demand, you expect LNG, to take up the challenge. But the way the Nigerian gas infrastructure is at the moment, it is not enough. So even the LNG as it stands now cannot rise to that challenge of the volume of demand. So Nigeria signed the Minister of State for Petroleum, Timi Silva, was in Algeria. That they signed a tripartite agreement with the oil ministers of Niger and Algeria to get the the trans-Saharan gas pipeline to Europe working. But it's a long-term project. So Europe currently is not looking for anything long-term. It's looking for short-term. Yes, the long-term goal is to win themselves off Russian energy. But for now, they need to keep their homes warm, which is why you're looking at countries like Senegal. And Morocco is also strategically positioning themselves to also be an important supplier, while the United States look at Qatar and several. So the West is basically looking for alternatives. But for us down here, south of the Sahel, there are some limitations that could come about such initiative because Senegal exporting gas to Europe, it's not going to pass through the Sahara Desert. It's going to be passing through the Gulf of Guinea to the Atlantic and then to Southern Europe before it gets to Central Europe. So the major challenge in that route is the sea piracy crisis in the Gulf of Guinea, which for now it seems to be on hold because of the presence of international navies and the other powerful maritime presence along the Gulf, which has kept the sea pirates at bay. The NIMASA came out sometime last year or early this year to say that piracy in the Gulf of Guinea has reduced by 77% for the past year. So I think that is a good boon. So compare with Nigeria trying to export gas through the Sahara to Europe, which is a lot more challenging because of the presence of armed groups that could scuttle any such arrangement. So yes, there are good sides and there are bad sides. So I think it behoves on the parties to cut their cost and then to rein in how much they are going to be able to make or how much they are going to be losing from any of such deals.
Indeed, it is, as always, a balancing act. Confidence McHarry, thank you so much for your time and for your perspective this morning.
Thank you very much for having me once again.
Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson says the country's diplomats will discuss Turkey's demands during meetings in Ankara aimed at resolving Turkish reservations over Sweden and Finland's applications for NATO membership. Turkey says Sweden and Finland harbor people linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party militant group and followers of Fethullah Gulen, whom Ankara accuses of orchestrating a 2016 coup attempt.
Security and terrorism.
I mean, we have discussions, bilateral and trilateral discussions with Turkey right now, and of course we are eager to sort out any questions or issues that are at hand from the Turkish side. So I look forward to continuing this dialogue. Well, that's a question that only the Turkish government and the Turkish president can answer. What we're doing right now is to have a constructive dialogue with them. I mean, there is one Kurdish organization that is listed as a terrorist organization in Sweden and in the European Union, and that is PKK, not other organizations. So, I mean, that's the organization that is listed. Well, I mean, one of the reasons we're having this dialogue is to sort out any issues, any misunderstandings, and any questions that might be from the Turkish side.
In the meantime, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan's chief foreign policy advisor, Ibrahim Kalin, has held separate talks with members of the Swedish and Finnish delegations in Ankara in an effort to resolve Turkish opposition to their NATO applications. Ankara's objections have put the brakes on what Sweden and Finland had hoped would be a quick accession process as the two countries look to shore up their security following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. At a news conference following the talks, Ibrahim Kalin said Turkey's terrorism concerns and expectations about concrete steps to address them were conveyed to his counterparts. And after the break, Nike is not renewing franchise agreements with the biggest outlet it has in Russia. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Now, what has happened to some of those people we saw much earlier on in the first couple of days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, who had to flee Ukraine because they were there for particular reasons? They weren't citizens. They were residents there for a time. Some of them Nigerians, and quite a number of them returned to the country. Others went elsewhere. Well, one of them joins me this morning. Bisola Ogolowa is a returnee from Ukraine, a medical student who fled from the war and has in fact had to flee wars even before this very latest one. and she is in the Netherlands, from where she joins us this morning. Good morning, Bisola. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Hi, good morning.
Well, you've
Thank
had
you for
quite
inviting me.
you've had quite a journey. How did you end up in the Netherlands in the first place?
From Germany, I came to the Netherlands. So from Hungary to Germany and then Netherlands.
That's why I said you've had quite a journey. You went from Ukraine to Hungary, and then to Germany, and then now in the Netherlands. Are you hoping to stay in the Netherlands for quite a bit?
Yes. Yes, we got accommodation from the organizations here. So, and then we have our stay. Like they give you a BSN number, which permits you to stay as long as possible, right? As long as you can. So yes, and yes. So
What have you been doing since all of this settled? Are you going on with schooling, and if so, how?
well, honestly, I'm still trying to settle down, right? I'm still trying to settle down, honestly, because there's a lot of things, to settle, and classes in Ukraine are online, right? Everywhere it's online, so everyone is still back in school, but it's just that it's online. Yeah.
Are you able to do that conveniently? How are you overcoming things like the language barrier? Because, I mean, the language spoken in Ukraine is not the one you're speaking in the Netherlands, is it? How are you making the cultural adjustments?
Yeah, well, in the Netherlands, they speak a lot of them speak English, which is far more than Germany, right? So a lot of them in the Netherlands speak English. So I just go ahead and speak English.
Okay,
But
so you're
yeah,
not
but
you're not even trying to learn. You're not even trying to learn the local language yet.
well, they are yet to arrange because they had to arrange a Dutch class. 'Cause they speak Dutch here, Dutch class for us because it's actually necessary. Like you have to know the at least little things, little things like good morning or stuff like that, so you can be able to adjust more, right? Yeah.
How have you been able to keep in touch with others who left Ukraine at about the same time that you did, but are not with you right now in the Netherlands? Those who went elsewhere, and those who, for example, returned to Nigeria. How easy has it been to communicate with them, and then, of course, with your family, who I'm sure will be trying to monitor your movement and ensure your safety?
Yeah, okay, this whole thing at first it was really, a lot of things. Yeah, but as time went on, right now it's easier, right? I still communicate with a lot of my friends. Some of them are in fact, all of them are in different parts of this world. Some of them are in Portugal, some of them are in Germany, in Netherlands here, some of them, and also in Nigeria, of course. So I try to keep in touch with all of them because, you have to be updated. New informations are coming out every day, every second. So you really, really have to be updated, top notch of the news, right? So you don't miss out on whatever opportunities are there because really we are still looking for opportunities. We're not just being settled in, okay, Ukraine is having, but doing online classes, right? We still have to look for better opportunities, right? So we have to be informed every time. So I keep in touch with every one of them.
What are you hearing, and what are you experiencing in terms of, as you mentioned now, you talk about information. Are you getting any kind of help from or any kind of information from the Nigerian authorities, for example, the Nigerian mission in the Netherlands, or when you were in Germany or in Hungary, or even now that you're trying to settle down? Is there anybody monitoring your progress and trying to ensure that you're treated properly and that you're put through the paces properly without you running into any kind of trouble?
Well, as for Nigeria, the only thing that I know that they really did was the free flights, right? So, but recently I got this group for Nigerians, different states, right, on Telegram, and they were like, they were giving financial support, right? We should fill a form on internet online and fill our bank statement and all that. I did all that, but I haven't received any any reply whatsoever from there. The only thing I got initially was to join the group and then go on the website and fill the information. But as of that, as a follow-up, I haven't got anything. So I really don't know what the Nigerian government is doing, right? I really, yeah. If it's every other government aside Nigerian, yes, they're really doing a lot, right? They're accommodating us, they're giving us literally like everything is free. Everything is mostly free here, right? Like accommodation is free, transport is free. What do you call, you have your medical insurance, and yeah. And the only thing is that as time goes on, obviously, we know that these things are going to be reducing, right? So that's why we have to be informed, because you don't want to go to a boss, say, oh, I'm from Ukraine, you expect it to be free. And meanwhile, they've stopped the free bus ticket. So, yeah.
I must, of course, ask you, how long are you hoping that you can stay, for example, in the Netherlands? And what are your immediate goals? Is it to complete your studies, and when you do that, perhaps you then look for other opportunities? Or are you, even right now as we speak, looking for opportunities for more stable place or places where you can be, especially in light of what you said, where you said you expect that all the help you are getting will not last forever, and that at some point some of it will start to be drawn back?
Yeah, of course, I do have plans. I'm still searching for opportunities, right? Because initially, even as of now, a lot of the opportunities they're really giving for free tuition, like scholarship, is for summer period, right? Even in US, right? Some schools, online, on the news, they were like, US are offering you students from Ukraine free tuition, blah blah blah. And sorry about that. And when I sent an email, when I communicated with them, it was just for the summer, right? So for me, I'll say for myself, for me as a medical student, right, in my fourth year, I'm not just looking for a summer plan, right? I'm looking for something that is prolonged, something that is I'm going to finish my medical degree, because I've been on this journey for quite a while. So I don't want to settle for something that is just temporary, right? I want to settle for something that is permanent. So I still have plans. I'm still looking for opportunities, and that would take me the long run, right? Yeah.
Are you under any pressure? Because as I'm looking at you now, I'm just wondering, are you under any pressure from the family to consider coming back home? Because they're probably very, very worried at all your movement in the last couple of weeks.
Well, I'm not under any pressure, to be honest, coming back home. In fact, initially, I didn't want to go back home. I didn't want to go back home, and everybody was okay with it, right? My mom was okay with it because, like you said at first, this is my second time leaving Ukraine. So as of 2014, I had to leave Ukraine because of the war thingy, and then I got an opportunity somewhere else anyway. So I was like, okay, why do I have to stay in Ukraine because of the war? Why can't I leave, since I had a opportunity, right? So, but this time around, I was like, I wasn't gonna leave again, because I already left the first time, right? I wasn't gonna leave again this time around, because I wanted to finish my medical degree, because like I said, it's been a long run. So kind of tired of still being here, right? I want to finish. So initially I didn't want to leave. When the whole war, everybody was talking about the war was going to start and all that stuff like that, we didn't believe that it was going to get to this. It was even going to get as close to this extent, right? Everybody, because as of 2014, this whole war stuff started, but it wasn't nearly bad as this, right? So we're thinking that it was just going to be like that, and I didn't want to leave at all. But well, as time went on, it was really unthinkable, like bad. So I had to leave, and yeah. So going back to Nigeria is not an option for me, because I'm looking what are the opportunities for me if I go back to Nigeria, right? What are the opportunities for me, right? If I go back to Nigeria, my first goal is to finish my medical degree. And quite all right, Ukraine are having online classes, but we really don't know the future of Ukraine as of right now. Yesterday, Zaporozhye, which was my city, my former city, and close to the city that I currently stayed before I left Ukraine, there was a missile hit in one of the complex stores there. And, we were thinking that it was reducing, but having to hear of the news of that hit yesterday, I'm thinking, what is going on? We thought it was getting like at least getting a little better, but we don't know the future of Ukraine right now. So I can't just depend on my online classes, right? And say I want to go back to Nigeria. Like I'm thinking about, something better.
Obviously, and one can always we'll keep in touch with you and monitor your progress, Bisola. But for now, I think it's just enough to wish you the very best of luck, and please stay safe out there as you go about it. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Bisola Ogoluwa.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The European Commission has proposed to make breaking European Union sanctions against Russia a crime, a move that would allow EU governments to confiscate assets of companies and individuals that evade EU restrictions against Moscow. Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders said the objective to facilitate and improve the implementation by member states of restrictive measures adopted by the European Union in response to Russia's unjustified invasion of Ukraine. The Commission also proposed to make it generally easier to confiscate assets of criminals in the EU, making it possible to impose an immediate freeze order to prevent the assets from being moved before a proper court order confirms it.
We are targeting both those that benefit from violating union restrictive measures, but also those that facilitate it. This will mean that both the oligarch, to be concrete, and their associates, lawyers, bankers, will be within the scope of the offence. Similarly, with penalties, we suggest that both natural and legal persons could be subject to penalties to ensure all possible violations of union restrictive measures are properly penalised. It will be possible or easier to confiscate the proceeds of that crime. And I want just to add that we have said also to the member states, if it's possible to seize some assets at the end, in the case of the war in Ukraine, we want to see the member state putting the money coming from the confiscation in a common fund to help Ukraine, so to start the way to give the money back to the victims, in fact.
And Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says his country is upset to see the European Union sanctions against Russia, quote, hanging in the air. Mr. Kuleba was referring to the EU's sixth package of sanctions against Moscow, which should include an oil embargo. The European Commission this month proposed new sanctions, but they require the unanimous support of all 27 EU members, and Hungary has blocked them. Mr. Kuleba also said the battle for Donbas, where Russia is trying to take full control of the eastern Ukrainian region, looks, quote, like the battles of the Second World War.
We are upset, to say the least, to see how the sixth sanctions package by the European Union is hanging in the air because of the veto, basically de facto veto imposed by Hungary. And the war in Donbas, the battle for Donbas, is very much like the battles of the Second World War. So if you watched the movies about Second World War and you saw these pictures of tanks, airplanes, there were no helicopters at that time, planes, tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, trying to cross the lines to destroy defenders. This is exactly what is happening in Donbas. I'm afraid that no one in the world has a clear picture of what is happening there. Some villages and towns, they do not exist anymore. They were all turned into rubbles by Russian artillery fire, by Russian multiple launch rockets systems, and it's devastating. We need Russia overwhelms us in a number of heavy weapons, but the biggest disbalance is in multiple launch rocket systems. This is really the weapon that we badly need, and we are working with different countries on receiving them. If the issue of security guarantees to Ukraine is not resolved one way or another, there will always be a risk of war in Europe as long as Russia remains Russia.
President Vladimir Putin has ordered 10% rises in pensions and the minimum wage to cushion Russians from inflation, but denied the country's economic problems were all linked to the conflict in Ukraine. With annual inflation near 18% last month, the Kremlin leader acknowledged that 2022 would be quite difficult for the Russian economy. The pension increase comes into effect from June the 1st, while the minimum wage hike kicks in on July the 1st. Mr. Putin, whose approval rating has jumped more than 10 points since the start of the Ukraine campaign to 82%, according to the independent Levada Center's April poll, pledged in March to reduce poverty and inequality this year, in spite of crippling Western sanctions and high inflation. Russia's minimum wage currently stands at 13,890 rubles a month, while the average retirement pension amounts to 18,521 rubles per month. U.S. sportswear maker Nike has not renewed agreements with its largest franchisee in Russia. Inventive Retail Group, which operates Nike-branded stores in Russia through its subsidiary Up and Run, said that 37 stores would close down. The PR director said the main reason was the shortage of items in store after Nike had stopped shipping goods to Russia. Some Muscovites near Nike's flagship store in central Moscow said that they were sad to see Nike leaving Russia. Others believe the impact would be minimal, with local producers substituting the American brands with alternative products. Let's talk to Laddie Williams, our business correspondent, who joins me. Good morning, Laddie. The Nigerian Monetary Policy Committee meeting was Tuesday.
Right.
The Russians are having theirs today.
Yes, and apparently they've had the meeting already this morning, and they've actually reduced the rate as expected.
As we discussed before coming up.
Exactly. So it's 11% now. You know, we saw how they raised rates to about 20%. You know, when the U.S. and its allies actually, you know, hit them with all kinds of financial sanctions, you know, because of the war in Ukraine. And we saw how that impacted the ruble. The ruble jumped to about 160 rubles to a dollar. It devalued. And we saw how the economy, Russians were trying to send out, you know, funds.
Even through Bitcoin.
Even through Bitcoin, you know, to save, you know, most of their assets. But they brought in a couple of financial controls, and most of that, you know, helped to stabilize the ruble, you know, and, you know, kind of cushion the impact, you know, of the sanctions. So they're saying, you know what, it's time to start to, you know, reduce some of these capital controls.
Because as you told me yesterday, the ruble then became so strong, it started having impact on their exports.
Exactly. So the exports are becoming more, you know, expensive. So they're saying it's time to, you know, calm down with some of these, you know, controls, you know, bring down the interest rate. But at the same time, this is, you know, it's quite funny because we're seeing rising inflation. Central bankers all over the world are raising rates, and, you know,
the Russians are going in the other direction.
You know, which are the cause, you know, of this war, are going the other way. It's quite interesting, but it remains to be seen if they can actually keep this up, because we know inflation is still rising, you know, at this point, because energy prices are still rising. We still have the same headwinds, you know, at this point. But with the controls they have, they're able to do this. But can they sustain this? Remains to be seen.
Natural gas prices are going haywire. They're going way, 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 way up.
Yep.
And that, of course, is going to have some impact because the inventories are low. So that means that demand currently is outstripping supply.
Exactly. So, and at the end of the day, we know Russia is a big supplier of gas. And, you know, because of this war, we've seen Europe try to, you know, reduce their reliance on Russian gas. But with this price surge, the Russians are still making money. They're making more money, you know, than they would, you know, before the war. And we've seen the price of natural gas hit a new high. From the beginning of this year, it's gone up about 150%. That's a massive run. And
so even if they're producing less, the changes in the prices mean that their revenue still remains,
will still be maintained.
Quite bad.
Yeah, so they're still making good money at this point, even though we're seeing, but Europe is still divided. We know how heavily reliant they are. So we've seen Finland, they've been cut off, from their
from
their
Russia's
supplies. But at the end of the day, Finland is still able to maneuver. But other European countries are still heavily reliant.
It easy.
And some are already paying in ruble, which is also
helping Russia.
Helping Russia, and strengthening the ruble at this point. So, well, since the ruble is getting stronger, maybe they might say, oh, maybe we can take euros for gas at this point because the ruble is getting really strong.
I'm going to come back to you on that one. Let's take a quick break. When we return, of course, we'll talk about how the other markets are faring with this. So just stay on with us. President Putin has been visiting Russian soldiers who were wounded during the military operation in Ukraine. That's after the break. We'll be taking on the sports news in just a moment, but before that, I still have Laddie Williams with me here of our business desk. Laddie, other markets are also having a mixed bag, kind of. All this interest rate hikes, attempts to deal with inflation, attempts to avoid a recession, and yet supply chain disruptions.
So, yeah, we've seen the markets, react to all of these headwinds, Investors right now is their stance is risk off. So all the risky assets they've plunged a lot, especially the NASDAQ, the S&P. Europe too wasn't left out. But yesterday, most of the markets were in the green. Investors were, checking out the minutes, for the Fed, the
details.
The devil's in the details.
Exactly,
and they found out that, okay, nothing out of the ordinary. So the markets reacted positively to that. But we still see, the markets are still in bear, territory at this point. Even the crypto market, we're seeing Bitcoin struggling, to stay above $30,000 with all the issues happening in that market, from stable coins becoming unstable. We've seen all of that impact, prices. But investors are still hoping for some kind of lifeline, but it depends on the kind of investor you are right now. If you're long-term, you can overlook some of these losses,
you can wait it out.
And wait it out, and hopefully at the end of the tunnel you see some profit. But it's not easy. I keep saying it's not easy being an investor, in these times with all of these headwinds. But the markets are looking quite green today.
Indeed, Laddie, and of course, John McQuarrie will have further details of that on our business programs. First, right after this program, and then later on in the course of the day. But for now, thank you, Laddie.
Thank you.
Let's take some sports news emanating from the war in Ukraine. The Confederation of African Football, CAF, and Morocco's Football Federation have announced ticketing plans and procedures for the 2021-2022 Africa Champions League final between Al Ahly and Wydad Casablanca on May the 30th. According to the football bodies, the maximum capacity of the Mohammed V Stadium in Casablanca has been set at 45,000 people in accordance with safety and security regulations. 10,000 seats will be reserved for each team to enable them acquire tickets for their supporters. 20,000 will be made available to the general public, while 5,000 will be allocated to CAF and its sponsors. The football bodies add that no tickets will be sold at the stadium on match day. And the United Kingdom Sports Minister Nadine Dorries has confirmed that Chelsea's sale will not benefit former owner Roman Abramovich. The British government issued a license that permits the sale of the club to a consortium led by Todd Boehly for £4.25 billion after months of negotiations receiving legal guarantees. The completion of the sale will now allow Chelsea to renew transfer activity as well as permit players to sign new contracts.
Football? I agree with him, and we have tolerated the investment of Russian kleptocrats for far too long. And yesterday's announcements show that I think that we have reached a turning point. We need to make sure that football clubs remain viable. That is an important point, that they remain viable.
Meanwhile, the Russian sports minister Oleg Matsizin has described the shortage of sports equipment in the country as, quote, a crisis as sanctions begin to bite. Mr. Matsizin reported that the measures imposed on Russia because of the war with Ukraine have affected the supply of equipment for elite and mass sport. Many countries, especially Western ones, have imposed stringent economic sanctions on Russia in response to the war in Ukraine, which is preventing the export of various sporting items. Russian Curling Federation President Dmitry Shevchev reported that there was a shortage of curling stones, while Russian figure skating coach Tatiana Tarasova insisted that Russia can produce the necessary equipment for the sport. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been visiting a Moscow military hospital to speak with soldiers whom Russian media said had been wounded in Russia's military operation in Ukraine. The president was accompanied by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. The Russian president shook the injured soldiers' hands and thanked them for their service. One of the soldiers, greeted by the Russian president, had asked for permission to continue fighting, according to the clinician initially speaking on their behalf, which Mr. Putin granted. It is not known how many Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded in what Moscow terms its special military operation in the east of Ukraine.
В Отдельно-Балканская республика.
Хотите служить?
Конечно.
Будете?
Спасибо.
Обязательно.
At West London's Hooked Fish and Chips shop owner Bali Singh is struggling to keep the tills ringing as this British staple is hit by skyrocketing inflation. From the fish and potatoes through to the cooking oil and the flour used for the mix, the fish is battered in, costs are rising. Relaying the stress of firing up the deep fryers only to see customers stay at home, Mr. Singh is having to navigate the fallout from the Ukraine war, the pandemic, and Brexit. Cordon chips in Singh's shop now cost almost £10 compared to £8 a year ago. Singh said that if he passed on all the increase in his costs, the price would be closer to £11. He hopes customers will understand about the price increase, but in the seaside town of Stevenage on the south coast, people eating fish and chips are noticing the higher prices. A spokesman for the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs said it was, quote, working closely with industry, including the National Federation of Fish Fryers, to mitigate the challenges that they are facing.
The fish prices have gone up extortionately. The oil prices have gone up extortionately, and everything across the whole spectrum that we sell have gone up extortionately. So we're finding it a struggle to keep our prices reasonable and competitive compared to other fast foods that are in the area. And we've actually seen a decline in our fish sales and customers walking through the door. We have raised our prices on our fish, but we've not raised it extensively. We've raised it at a reasonable price so that we can get customers in.
I'm getting daily phone calls that people are worried that they're going to go out of business and they're struggling and looking for help. And it's very difficult to give them any comfort because it is going to be a long-term problem. So there's quite a lot of businesses that are going to struggle through this. We've always said probably about a third of fish and chip shops will probably go over the next 5 years because there's a lot of smaller shops and it's difficult to keep up with legislation and the cost of keeping up with legislation. But I think that's sped up with the post-pandemic inflation to 18 months, and I think that is now probably the next 6 to 9 months because of the VAT bills. So that's the periods every quarter when you get the bill, that's what's going to knock a lot of businesses out.
Let's return to the theater of a war here, where Russia's foreign ministry says that an Italian peace plan for Ukraine is, quote, a fantasy. Referring to it in a weekly briefing, the ministry says one can't supply Ukraine with weapons with one hand and come up with plans for a peaceful resolution of the situation with the other. Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio gave the broad outlines of the plan last week and said that he had discussed it with United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres during a visit to New York. But the Russian Foreign Ministry has explained that Moscow is working on measures against English language media in response to, quote, unfriendly actions by foreign governments towards Russian media. Russia is preparing the measures, particularly against Anglo-Saxon media, using a term Russian officials often use to refer to the English-speaking world. And let's take our final story. This morning, a corridor equipped with solid steel doors can take one straight down to the lower levels of a Finnish underground shelter that the government has been utilizing as a sports facility. With blast-proof walls and bunkers, the Hakaniemi Emergency Shelter was built in 2003 and is one of the many in the capital to provide cover for the city's 650,000 residents. Emergency services officers say this facility can house up to 6,000 people and can be used to shield even from a nuclear attack. The shelter is located underground and serves as a sports facility as well as a parking lot, but can be reverted to a shelter within 72 hours. According to the City of Helsinki's governmental portal, there are approximately 5,500 other shelters with enough capacity to house those living and visiting the capital in case of an attack.
The first barrier of the safety is the corridor where you came in. So the drop from the surface level is taking the most of the blast effects away. Most of our shelters are from the 60s and the 70s, and this is one of the newest one from 2003. So the construction is still the same, but this is cleaner. And one part of why this shelter is still reasonably clean after 20 years of use is that we have the dual use purpose. So the entrepreneurs who are renting this space are keeping it clean. It is impossible to say 100% sure that, okay, we can absorb this and this much of weapon effects. But it is calculated to the highest of forms of protection.
That seems to be Finland's way of preparing for any eventualities, seeing what is going on in Ukraine. And it's on that note that we end our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. I am Ladi Akiri. There's an update at 5 o'clock within the world today. Do watch out for that. Good morning.